The alien world of Thryon was a place of endless storms, dark skies, broken lands, and cities filled with fear. The war had lasted for years, and the aliens had grown used to the sound of weapons and screams. But on one strange evening, the sound changed. It was not the thunder of guns or the roar of ships. It was the quiet echo of footsteps, slow and steady. A man had arrived. He was a human, but not like the soldiers the aliens had fought before. He wore no armor, carried no weapon, and held no banner. He was dressed in simple robes, the kind worn by priests on Earth. A chain with a small cross hung around his neck. The aliens who saw him laughed, their voices filled with mockery. A priest, here, on a battlefield. What madness was this? The alien commanders ordered their soldiers to keep watch. They thought perhaps this human was a distraction, a weak bait before the real attack. But the man did not speak, he did not shout, he did not move with fear. He simply walked, slow and calm, his eyes fixed on the broken horizon. Every step he took felt heavier than the last. The air itself seemed to shiver around him. Among the aliens there was a young girl named Saraya. She was not a soldier, only a servant forced to follow the army. Her people had been broken by war, and she had no choice but to obey. When she first saw the human priest, her heart froze. She could not explain why. He looked weak, fragile even. Yet her chest tightened as though danger itself had walked into the camp. The alien soldiers began to jeer. "Look at him, the holy fool," one shouted. "Does he think prayers can stop our blades?" Another laughed. But when the priest turned his eyes toward them, their laughter died. His gaze was not filled with anger, not even hate. It was calm, steady, unshaken. It was the kind of gaze that made even armed men step back without knowing why. Saraya watched closely, her curiosity stronger than her fear. The priest stopped in the center of the ruined square. There he knelt down, his hands folded, his head bowed. He whispered something, words too soft for the aliens to hear, but the air changed. The winds that had screamed through the battlefield slowed. The fire that burned in the wreckage dimmed, and for the first time in years, silence touched the land. The aliens looked around, confused. Their weapons felt heavy in their hands, their armor tight around their throats. One soldier shouted for him to stop, but his voice cracked in terror. Another raised his gun, but his hands shook so badly he could not aim. The priest said nothing. He simply continued his prayer. The silence spread wider, wrapping around the camp like an invisible cage. Saraya clutched her chest, her heart racing. "What is he?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She wanted to look away, but her eyes could not move from him. He was only human, and yet the entire alien camp stood frozen in fear. The commanders tried to rally their men, shouting that he was a trick, a fraud, but their voices felt small, weak, and meaningless, for deep inside, every alien felt the same thing. This man was not to be mocked. This man was danger. Minutes passed. Though they felt like hours, the priest finally rose to his feet. His prayer ended. He opened his eyes, and they glowed with a strange light, not fire, not electricity, but something deeper. The aliens stepped back, their bodies moving before their minds could even think. The commander ordered them to capture him, but no one dared to step forward. It was as though their legs had turned to stone. Saraya could not breathe, her entire body trembling. She had seen war. She had seen death. She had seen horrors beyond words. But never had she seen fear spread like this. Fear not of weapons, not of fire, but of one single human. Her people had always thought humans weak compared to their empire, but now she felt a truth that made her blood run cold. This priest was something else. This priest was a storm hidden in silence. As the night grew darker, the human priest stood tall, unmoved by the thousands of eyes on him. He spoke at last, his voice calm, steady, and terrifying in its certainty. "I walk with faith," he said, "and faith walks with me." The words echoed like thunder, though his tone was soft. The aliens shivered, their bodies cold though. No wind blew. Even Soraya could not stop the tears in her eyes. She had thought nothing could shock her anymore. But this human, this silent priest, had proven her wrong. The silent arrival was no accident. It was the beginning of something far greater, something that would turn him into the greatest fear her people had ever known. And deep inside, Soraya knew this was only the first night of terror to come. Asterisk. The night after the priest's arrival was restless. The alien soldiers did not sleep, though they were trained to fight wars without fear. This was different. Their weapons worked. Their ships still hovered. But something had changed. Every shadow felt alive. Every sound carried weight. And in the center of their camp stood one man. Silent, unmoved, the human priest. The commanders tried to dismiss it. He is just a man, nothing more, they shouted to their warriors. But their own voices betrayed doubt. They could not forget how their soldiers had frozen, how their courage had died in silence. Still, orders were orders. They prepared a squad of their strongest fighters to surround the priest at dawn. As the first light broke through the stormy clouds, the priest opened his eyes. He did not raise a weapon, he did not run. Instead, he whispered. Words soft and strange, words no alien could understand. But the ground listened. The earth trembled faintly beneath their feet. A low hum filled the air, as though the world itself had begun to breathe. Soraya, the alien girl who had watched him the night before, was there again. She had hidden among the ruins, too curious to leave, too afraid to stay away. When she heard his whispers, her blood ran cold. It was not the language of her people. It was not the language of humans. It was something older, something deeper. The words felt like they came from the bones of the universe itself. The squad stepped forward, blasters aimed. Move or die. Their leader shouted, his voice trembling despite his armor. The priest looked at them. Calm as the still water of a lake, he whispered again. And this time the aliens saw it. Their weapons glowed, faint lines of light crawling across their surfaces. Then, with a single sound like breaking glass, the weapons shattered into dust. The soldiers screamed in terror, dropping the remains from their hands. One fell to his knees, crying out. He is a curse, a demon, the commander roared at them to fight, but his words meant nothing. The squad broke ranks, backing away with wide eyes. The priest said nothing. He only lowered his head again in silent prayer. Soraya pressed her hands against her mouth. Her people believed only their empire had power. But here stood one man, unarmed, untouched, and already the whispers were spreading. The human priest was not weak. He was not harmless. He was something far worse. The camp filled with rumors. Some said he was a ghost, risen from human dead. Others said he was blessed by stars themselves. And still others whispered that no weapon could kill him. Fear crawled from soldier to soldier, commander to commander. The whispers grew louder than the war drums. Even when he stood in silence, they imagined his power that night. Storms raged above the alien city. But inside the ruined square, where the priest had first prayed, the wind was still. Soraya crept closer, hiding behind a broken wall. She wanted to see him, to hear him again. And when he whispered, she felt her knees weaken. The words were soft, yet they struck her heart harder than any blade. She whispered to herself, "He is only human. Then why does he feel greater than all of us?" Her voice trembled in the empty night, and though he did not turn to look at her, she felt he had heard. The silence grew heavy, pressing against her chest, until she could hardly breathe. Far away, the alien High Council received news of the priest. They laughed at first. A priest? This is the monster they fear? They mocked, but the fear of their soldiers could not be denied. Whispers reached even their ears. One human had broken weapons with only words. One human had stopped armies with silence, and the council began to worry. Soraya lay awake that night, unable to close her eyes. The image of the priest haunted her mind, not because he was terrifying, but because he was calm, unbroken. He carried no rage, no hate, no pride, and yet He was more dangerous than any army her people had ever faced. When dawn came, she returned again to watch him, and when she looked into his eyes, she finally understood her fear. It was not his power, not his whispers, not his silence. It was the truth that hid behind his gaze, the truth that humans carried something her people could never defeat, something greater than weapons, greater than fear itself. And as the whispers spread across the stars, one thing became certain: the human priest had only begun his war, and soon all who heard his name would tremble. The alien commanders could no longer bear the shame. Their soldiers were whispering like frightened children. Their weapons had failed, their courage had melted, and still the priest stood in silence. It was an insult to their empire. It was a wound to their pride. So they made a decision. The human priest would be destroyed in front of all. At sunrise, the camp gathered. Thousands of aliens stood in a ring around the broken square. Their banners waved in the stormy wind. The commanders pushed forward their most brutal warriors, armored in steel, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. These were the champions of their people, the killers of humans, the destroyers of armies. And now they marched to face one man, one priest. Soraya stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding. She had seen whispers of power. She had seen fear spread like a plague. But now she wondered, would even he survive this? The warriors were no ordinary soldiers. Each was trained in 100 battles. Each had slain humans without hesitation. Their steps shook the ground as they closed in, and still the priest did not move. The commander raised his hand. "Show them the weakness of humans," he roared. The crowd answered with thunderous cries. The warriors rushed forward, their blades shining with energy. The first swung at the priest's head, fast as lightning. But before the blade struck, the priest lifted his hand. The weapon shattered, breaking into dust. The warrior stumbled, screaming. His strength turned into nothing. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The second warrior roared and attacked from behind. The priest did not even turn. He spoke one word, soft and calm. The air itself bent, and the warrior was thrown backward as if struck by an invisible wall. He crashed into the ground, his armor broken, his body trembling. The third warrior, enraged, charged with both hands. Gripping his blade, he leapt into the air, aiming to split the priest in two. But as he fell, the earth cracked open beneath him. A great fissure split the stone, swallowing his strike. His weapon vanished into the darkness, and he was left kneeling in terror. The alien crowd fell into silence. Even the wind seemed afraid to blow. The champions of their people, humiliated in moments. And the priest had not struck once. He had not bled. He had not moved more than a step. It was not battle. It was judgment. Soraya's breath caught in her throat. Her hands shook as she clutched the broken wall for balance. She wanted to scream, but no sound left her lips. It was not possible. It should not be possible. And yet she had seen it with her own eyes. One man against warriors of legend, and he had broken them like glass. The commander's face twisted with rage. "This is trickery," he shouted, his voice breaking with fear. "Attack him, all of you, crush him." Hundreds of soldiers raised their weapons, aiming at the priest, but before they could fire, the priest opened his eyes fully. They glowed like fire hidden in stone. Not bright, but endless. The soldiers froze, their fingers unable to pull the triggers. Their hearts thundered in their chests, their breath caught in their throats. And then he spoke. His voice was quiet, yet it carried across the entire square. "You fear me because you fear yourselves," he said. "You fear because you know truth cannot be killed with metal." The words struck deeper than any blade. Even Soraya felt her knees weaken, her mind struggling to hold his gaze. One by one, the soldiers lowered their weapons. Some fell to their knees, others dropped their guns and stepped back. The commanders shouted, cursing, threatening, but their words meant nothing now. The crowd had seen the truth. The human priest was not a man to be mocked. He was a shadow over their hearts. He was their greatest fear. Soraya whispered to herself, tears stinging her eyes. He is only one man, only one human. Then why does he feel like an army? Why does he feel like the end? The priest turned, his robes shifting softly in the wind. He did not raise his arms in victory. He did not strike the fallen. He simply walked forward, past the broken champions, past the terrified soldiers, and none dared to stop him. The crowd parted like water before him. And as he disappeared into the storm, one thing became certain. The first confrontation was not a defeat, it was a warning. A warning that the aliens would never forget, and Soraya knew this was only the beginning. Asterisk, the camp was silent long after the priest had walked away. The champions lay broken, the soldiers shaken, and the commanders humiliated. No victory songs rose, no war drums sounded, only whispers, carried like smoke through the ruined city. Whispers of the human priest. At first the commanders tried to deny it. They shouted that it was illusion, that the warriors had failed because of weakness, but no soldier believed them. They had seen weapons shatter into dust. They had seen champions fall with a single word. Their fear had already taken root, and fear spreads faster than fire. In the days that followed, the soldiers spoke in hushed voices. They said the priest was not a man but a shadow. They said he carried the power of forgotten gods. Some swore that even looking into his eyes could turn courage into ash. And though none admitted it aloud, every alien knew they would rather face an army of humans than stand before him alone. Soraya heard the whispers everywhere she walked, and the kitchens where servants prepared food, and the barracks where soldiers polished their broken weapons. Even in the high towers where the commanders met, the fear of one man had poisoned them all. But she also felt something strange inside herself. Fear, yes, but also a deep unease. The priest had not struck them down in anger. He had not sought blood. He had been calm, almost merciful, and that made him more terrifying. Because monsters kill without thought, but he chose not to. That choice made him greater than any monster when night came. Soraya found herself wandering back to the square. She wanted to see if he had returned, but the place was empty. Only ashes and broken stone remained, yet she felt him there, as though his silence still lingered. Her hands trembled as she whispered to herself, "Why does he not kill us all? Why does he hold back?" Her words vanished into the wind. Unanswered, far beyond the camp, stories began to spread. Messengers carried the tale of the human priest to other alien legions. Each telling grew darker. Some said he could shatter ships with his breath. Others claimed he could turn whole armies. Blind with a single prayer, the truth no longer mattered. The fear itself was now the weapon. In the alien capital, the High Council gathered. Reports filled their chamber, reports of desertion, of soldiers refusing orders. Commanders admitted their men trembled at night, whispering his name like a curse. The council argued, "He is only one man." One elder growled, but another whispered, "Yes, and still he breaks us." Meanwhile, in the ruins, Soraya's curiosity grew stronger. She had once thought of humans as weak, as prey. Her people had laughed at them, crushed them, enslaved them. But this man was different, and she could not stop asking herself, what if all humans are like him? The thought filled her with dread, for if even a fraction of that was true, then the war was already lost. The next dawn came with heavy fog. The soldiers marched nervously through the streets, checking every shadow. They jumped at every sound. Weapons raised though no enemy stood there. Children whispered songs about the priest, songs of death and judgment. Even the animals seemed restless, as though sensing the fear of their masters. Soraya saw it all. She saw her people unravel without a single strike, and she began to understand the truth. The human priest did not need to fight every battle. His greatest weapon was not his power, it was the terror he planted in their hearts. Terror that grew stronger each time his name was spoken. That night, she dreamed of him. She dreamed of his calm eyes and the soft whisper of his voice. When she woke, she was shaking. She hated him. She feared him. But still she could not look away. And in her heart she knew. The fear had grown too much to ever be undone. Across the stars, soldiers, leaders, and civilians repeated the same words. The human priest walks, and wherever he walks, armies fall. The fear had grown into legend, and legends are harder to kill than men. The alien camp could no longer hide its fear. Soldiers refused to patrol at night. Commanders whispered behind closed doors. Even the strongest warriors kept their weapons close, though they knew weapons meant nothing. But through all of this chaos, one figure remained calm. The human priest. He walked the ruins as though the land belonged to him. Never hurried, never afraid, never tired. Every step seemed to echo louder than the marching of armies. The soldiers watched him from the shadows. They wanted to strike, but none dared to move. It was as though their own bodies betrayed them. Their fear was greater than their hatred. Saraya could not bear it any longer. She had watched him for days. She had seen warriors fall. She had heard the whispers grow, but questions burned inside her. Who was he? What was he? She told herself. She hated him. But she could not deny the truth. She needed to know that night. While the moon hid behind storm clouds, Saraya followed him. The priest walked to the broken square where his first prayer had silenced the camp. He knelt again, folding his hands, his lips moving softly. The world around him seemed to bend toward his whispers. The fires dimmed, the wind slowed, even the shadows leaned closer. Saraya's chest tightened as she stepped forward. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The priest did not answer, his eyes still closed. "I asked you a question," she shouted, though fear shook every word. This time he opened his eyes, calm and endless. Saraya stumbled back, her knees weak, but she refused to run. "I need to know," she whispered. "What are you? Why do you terrify my people?" The priest stood, slow and steady. He was not taller than the warriors, not stronger than the champions, and yet he felt larger than the world itself. He looked at her, and for the first time he spoke more than a sentence. "I am only human," he said softly. Saraya shook her head. "No, you are more than that. No human can do what you do." He walked closer, his steps quiet, his voice calm. "You see power in me, but power is not what makes you tremble." He lifted his hand, holding nothing but the chain that hung from his neck. The small cross glimmered faintly in the pale moonlight. "This," he whispered, "is what you fear." Faith. Saraya froze, her eyes wide. She did not understand faith. It was only a word, a belief. How could belief shatter weapons? How could belief break armies? The priest saw her confusion, and his voice deepened. "You mistake strength for fire and steel. But true strength lives in the will to stand when all others fall. It lives in the heart that refuses to break. My people call it faith, and it cannot be taken." Saraya felt her breath leave her chest. She wanted to deny it, to scream at him. But she remembered the champions broken at his feet. She remembered the soldiers too afraid to fight. She remembered her own trembling hands whenever she looked at him. And she knew, deep inside, it was true. Her people had always trusted weapons, trusted power, trusted fear. But none of those things had stopped him, because he carried something invisible, something untouchable. And suddenly she realized the most terrifying truth of all. If one human priest could do this, what would happen if all of humanity carried such faith? Her body shook, tears burned her eyes. "You are a monster," she whispered. The priest shook his head gently. "No, child, I am only human. It is your people who never understood what humans truly are." The words cut deeper than any blade. Saraya felt her heart crumble. She turned away, covering her face. But the whispers of his voice stayed in her ears. Faith, will, unbreakable, unstoppable. She finally understood why her people were afraid. Because they had no weapon against this. The priest walked past her, his robes brushing the cold air. He did not strike, he did not bind her, he did not even threaten, and yet his silence weighed heavier than chains. As he disappeared into the shadows, Saraya fell to her knees. Her voice shook as she whispered to herself, He is only human, and that is why we will never defeat him. Asterisk. The alien High Council could no longer stay silent. The stories of the human priest had spread across their worlds like a plague. Soldiers trembled at his name. Commanders hesitated to march. Even citizens whispered of him in their homes. One man had become a shadow greater than their fleets, and the council decided that shadow must be destroyed. They gathered an army unlike any before, tens of thousands of warriors. Armored with their strongest steel, warships hovered above the ruined city. Their cannons glowing, beasts bred for war howled in cages. Waiting to be unleashed, the commanders told themselves this was the end. No human, not even this priest, could survive such power. Soraya stood among the crowd, her heart heavy. She had seen his strength, she had heard his truth, and now she feared what was coming more than she feared her own leaders. For deep inside she knew, this was not the end of him. This was the breaking point, and when it passed, her people would never be the same. The priest stood alone in the square, robes drifting in the stormy wind. He did not run, he did not hide. He lifted his eyes to the sky where warships darkened the heavens, and he whispered, his voice too soft for any alien to hear. But the earth heard, the sky heard, even the silence itself seemed to listen. The commander raised his arm, his voice echoing through the city. Fire, the cannons roared. Beams of burning light crashed toward the ground. Explosions shook the ruins, fire rose high into the storm. The crowd screamed as the square vanished in flame. The commanders smiled at last. It is finished, they said. But then the fire cleared, and he was still standing, the human priest, untouched, his robes flowing in the heat. His eyes glowed with a calm fire that was not of this world. Gasps spread like thunder through the alien ranks. Soldiers stumbled back, some dropping their weapons in shock. Soraya covered her mouth with trembling hands, tears burning her eyes. She had known it, and yet seeing it broke her heart. He was unstoppable. The commander roared in fury. All forces attack. Thousands of soldiers rushed forward. Beasts tore from their cages. Ships descended lower. The ground shook under the weight of their march. It was as though the entire empire had come to crush one man. And still he did not move. Instead he knelt, his hands folding in prayer. The sky above darkened. Thunder rolled across the heavens. Lightning flashed, tearing open the clouds. The wind howled with a voice that was not natural. The soldiers slowed, their steps faltering, and then, with a single word from his lips, the world answered. The ground split open, swallowing ranks of warriors. War beasts screamed as fire burst from the cracks. Ships spun out of control, struck by storms that came from nowhere. The army broke in chaos, but the priest remained calm, his prayer unbroken. The storm was his shield, the earth his ally. It was not sorcery. It was not trickery. It was faith, so strong it bent the world itself. Soraya fell to her knees, unable to look away. Her people had always trusted power, but here power turned against them. Their greatest army scattered like sand, their strongest weapons fell silent, and all because one man refused to bow. She whispered through her tears, "He kneels only to his faith, never to us." The battlefield became a place of terror. Warriors dropped their weapons and fled. Commanders begged their ships to retreat. The High Council's great plan lay in ruins. One priest had broken an empire's pride. One human had brought them to the breaking point. When the storm finally calmed, the ruins were silent again. Bodies lay scattered, weapons shattered, fires dying, and in the center stood the priest. His robes untouched, he opened his eyes, looking at the broken army, and he spoke, his voice carrying through the silence like a final judgment. "You build your strength on fear. We build ours on faith. That is why you fall. And that is why we rise." The words echoed across the ruins, across the hearts of every alien who heard them. Soraya bowed her head, her body trembling. She had once thought humans weak, fragile, hopeless, but now she knew the truth. Faith was the strongest weapon in the galaxy. And the human priest had proved it beyond all doubt. The battlefield lay in ruins. The smoke of burning ships drifted into the dark sky. Weapons lay broken in the dirt. Warriors fled in panic. Commanders screamed for order, but none listened. An army of thousands had been shattered, not by weapons, not by armies, but by one man, the human priest. He stood in the center of it all, calm, unmoved. The storm had faded. The earth was still. But the silence was heavier than any noise. The aliens could not bear to look at him. Those who did saw not just a man, but something greater, something they could not understand, their greatest fear. Saraya knelt among the ruins, her hands pressed to the ground. Tears blurred her vision. Her body shook. She had seen empires rise. She had seen humans enslaved, but she had never seen this. One priest bringing her people to their knees without ever raising a blade. Her heart ached with a strange mix of fear and awe. She whispered to herself, "How can one human stand against the stars?" The soldiers who survived fled into the night. They whispered his name in terror, their voices trembling. The human priest, the breaker of armies, the silence that destroys. The name spread faster than light, carried on frightened tongues. In distant worlds, people would soon hear thee. Tale and shiver. Children would speak his name in fear. Commanders would wake from nightmares of him, and the empire would never be the same. The High Council heard the reports with horror. Their strongest army, their war beasts, their ships, all broken by one man. Some demanded his death, others demanded retreat. But in their hearts, they all knew they were no longer at war with humanity's weapons. They were at war with humanity's spirit, and that was a war they could not win. Saraya rose slowly, her legs weak. She walked toward the priest, step by trembling step. He did not stop her. He only watched with calm eyes when she stood before him. She felt her breath fail. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to scream. But instead, she asked softly, "Why do you not kill us? Why do you let us live?" The priest lowered his gaze, his voice quiet. "Because fear is already your punishment," he said. "You will carry it with you, in every shadow, in every silence. That is a burden heavier than death." His words struck her like fire. She understood then that he had already won. Not because he destroyed their armies, but because he had destroyed their certainty, their pride, their belief in their own strength. Her people had always thought humans weak. Now they feared the truth more than death. The priest turned, walking into the storm. His steps echoed softly, fading into the distance. No one dared to follow. No one dared to stop him. The crowd of soldiers parted, silent and trembling. It was as if they watched not a man, but a legend walk away. Saraya fell to her knees once more, her voice breaking into the silence. "He is only human," she whispered, "and that is why he terrifies us more than any monster." From that day forward, the aliens carried his shadow wherever they went. They feared the storm. They feared the silence. They feared the whisper of prayers. But above all, they feared humanity. Because if one human priest could do this, then what would happen if all humans carried such faith? And so the story of the human priest spread across the stars, not as a tale of war, but as a tale of fear, a reminder that the strongest weapon in the galaxy was not steel, not fire, not ships. It was the will of humanity, the will to stand unbroken, the will to rise when all others fall. The aliens called him a nightmare, but humanity called him a symbol of what they all carried inside. And in the end, even Saraya knew, legends never die, they only grow. The human priest had become more than a man. He had become the greatest fear her people had ever known, and his shadow would live forever.